most people think, I know you don't, but most people think that the shofar is a ram's horn, and it can be far more than a ram's horn. But it started because of Abraham and Isaac. So when God asked Abraham to sacrifice his son, um, and of course it didn't happen. So Abraham went over and saw this ram in a bush, and he went ahead and slaughtered the ram, and that was the start of using the ram as a shofar. So in the Bible, you're going to see different words for trumpet or shofar. You're going to see hasotrot, which is a trumpet, but a shofar is used many times, and they're really mean. They're different things. The trumpet is a trumpet. It's an instrument, and it may not be meant as the shofar. So the material of a shofar almost always is the same material as on your nails. Your nails is keratin, and that's what a shofar is really about. So they make a shofar by, of course, cutting it off the animal, and the shofar is hollow, but they have to clean it, and they drill a hole at the end, and that's how they do it. Sometimes the shofar looks very, it's polished, looks glossy, and other times not so. And I'll show you in a moment what that might look like. It's used on a whole host of different occasions. In biblical times, the shofar announced the new moon. And when a president is sworn in Israel, they blast the shofar. So I have several shofars. I went to this shofar factory, which is in Tel Aviv, and you can see all of the different shofars in this factory. And I went in and I tried some shofars. I bought a couple. You can see all the horns in there, and they do it. And that's me over there on the right-hand side. And that's my grandson who's looking at one of the shofars. And on the left, on my left, is my son who's blowing a shofar. That's David. He's a rabbi. And so we all went over to the shofar factory in Tel Aviv, and we were looking at different shofars. And I'll blow the shofar that I actually bought a little later. So in biblical times, the shofar was sometimes used to tell people when the Sabbath was coming. So on Friday afternoon, they would blow the shofar and to tell, hey, stop working. And the third time they blew the shofar was a signal to light the Shabbos candles. And so that's how they began to do that. And they used different sounds, tekiah, teruah, to do that. Of course, the shofar is used on Rosh Hashanah. It won't be used on the first day of Rosh Hashanah because that's a Shabbos, and you don't blow the shofar on the first day if it's a Shabbos, or any day of the new year if it's a Shabbos, but you do blow it in this year, it will be on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, and you blow it at the end of Yom Kippur. So the reason, also, during the month of Elul, you blow the shofar. So during the whole month of Elul, the rabbi and I have been blowing the shofar at Shacharit services in the morning, and so it's a warning. It's telling you, hey, think about the new year. The new year is coming. So, and on Rosh Hashanah, it's customary to blow the shofar 100 times. 100 sounds. So, like I said, in the month of Elul, you do it. What's fascinating to me is that a lot of Christians use shofars.
Wow.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Did not know that, huh? Well, there are more shofars sold to certain types of Christians, I'll tell you in a second, than Jews. And they do it because when Isaiah said, hey, the shofar is going to be blown to signal the final redemption that comes from the Bible. And so some Christians have integrated the shofar into their church worship service. And the shofar is announced in different places in the Bible. I'm not going to go through all of this. And they talk about it being blown in the Jubilee year. And there's a special shofar that's blown for the Jubilee year. And I'll show you that in a moment. So shofars were also used to announce funerals in ancient times, and to assemble people for a meeting, and then short blasts to order them to battle. And you've heard about Joshua and Jericho and stuff like that. Well, the shofar was allegedly used. That's in the Bible. But in Christian writings, you'll also see references to the shofar. And here are some that, the shofar is actually used in some Christian writings.
Huh.
So in these places, especially in some evangelical churches, and there's an organization called Christians United for Israel. Very, very big group. And Trump is going after those people. And it turns out they use shofars in their services, so in all of these. And there are more, like I said a moment ago, there's more shofars sold to Christian groups than to Jews. Amazing, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not precise if you go ahead and take a look at the Tanakh, it's not precise as to what type of shofar. Should it be straight, curved? Can you decorate it? Can you not decorate it? Not 100% sure. So people then have to determine this by themselves. And so they've done it. And so they use the shofar from certain animals. And they would prefer a kosher animal. And these are the kosher animals that might be considered. I don't say they are considered, but they might be considered. And those are not kosher animals. I'll show you why in a minute. Cow is not used, but and a deer can't be used either because a deer's horns are not hollow. So you can't use something like a deer, even though it's a kosher animal. So in the oral law, the Mishnah, that's where they really talk about the shofar and decide, hey, what can be used, what can't be used. The minimum size, it's about I don't know. It could be 9 inches, but it could be less than that. Depends on which part you're reading. A preferred shofar is a corkscrew, a type of shofar. And the reason is because it symbolizes humility rather than standing straight. You don't want a shofar that's completely straight. That's too proud. And you're not supposed to be that proud on Rosh Hashanah. Supposed to be penitent, bent over, praying for the next year. So that's why you want to have a shofar, ideally, that's curved. And you're not supposed to put decoration. I have one shofar upstairs, which is all decorated, beautiful, beautiful shofar, painted, gorgeous, but you can't use it on Rosh Hashanah. I can blow it, but I'm not allowed to use it for Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. Now, you can't use a cow, even though a cow might have a horn, a bull might have a horn. And you can't use it because it's a reminder of the golden calf. And so the cow or the bull was punished. So we can't use the bull as a possibility for a shofar. The animal that is killed doesn't have to be killed ritually to be used as a shofar. You can't use a shofar composed of artificial material like plastic. It's got to be a real animal. Also, the animal has to be in good shape. It can't have holes in it or anything like that. So the cow is disqualified. A deer, excuse me, is disqualified because it's solid. It's not hollow. Well, a goat can be used. A goat can indeed be used, and it is used by certain people, and I'll talk in a moment about that. An ibex, and I'll show you what an ibex looks like. An ibex is not appropriate except for the Jubilee year. The Jubilee year happens every 100 years. Debts are forgiven, all kinds of wonderful things happen. Problem is, I don't remember when the Jubilee starts, so I can't tell you the next Jubilee year. So I don't think we're going to have a Jubilee year, but nonetheless, that's when it can be used. And I'll show it to you in a second from the ibex. So we can use the ram's horn. Here's the ram. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing for a second. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some different ram's horn. Now, I don't know how well you're going to see this, but this is a ram's horn. And you can see over here, this is kind of rough. So this wasn't polished well, intentionally. Intentionally, it's like the animal. So it wasn't polished very well. You can hear that. But this one is, you can see this one over here is polished, highly polished. So it's okay to have a ram's horn that's either rough, like the other one, or polished. Notice both of these, this one, are in a corkscrew shape, and this one also. This is a corkscrew shape. That's the preferred one. But now I'm going to show you something. Here is a highly polished shofar, and it's not a corkscrew shape, but it's like an L.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a reason for this being an L shape. It's because during the Spanish Inquisition and during certain times in Europe, Jews didn't want to show they were carrying a shofar as they were going to a place that they'll call a synagogue. So what they did, I don't know if you can see this now, but they took this shofar and the men just put it into their pants like this. And it goes in, because it's not a corkscrew, it just goes in really nicely like that. And you don't know that a person is carrying a shofar.
Wow.
So this was a special shofar, and it everything works with it. So it works just as well as anybody else. It's got a good sound. It's got a very nice sound, actually, and so it's a really nice shofar, but it's different. So you see three different kinds of shofars. All of those are ram's horns. Okay, and now we have the kudu. Now I know that you blow a kudu, Anna. I know that, and the kudu is very, very popular, and it makes a beautiful, beautiful sound. And I have, and that's the one that a lot of people in different synagogues, including Bethel, that's the one that they will go ahead and use. So a kudu, so this is, if this was sitting on the animal, it would be like this, like you saw a moment ago. And then you can blow it, and then it has a different sound than the ram's horn, because the ram's horn is smaller. So you would expect this one to be maybe a little lower in pitch. So it's a little lower, a little different than the other one. The kudu really came from the Yemenites, because there were a lot of kudus in that part of the world. So the Yemenites adopted the kudu. The Ashkenazi, and I'm an Ashkenazi Jew, most Ashkenazis years ago, maybe not so much today, but years ago, they all used the ram's horn. Sometimes they use the goat. I don't have a goat horn, but sometimes they would have used that. But Yemenites would use that. And of course, depending upon where you lived in the world, after the diaspora, the Jews traveled all over the world, so they had to use different animals. And so Ashkenazis, turns out, used rams. That was sheep is generally available. Dutch Jews used goats, and Moroccan Jews use all different kinds of horns. So this is the oryx. Now the oryx is an animal that, and remember I said, it's not really super good for Rosh Hashanah. And the reason is that horn is so straight,
Yeah.
and you're not supposed to have a completely straight horn. So this is the oryx horn, just
Wow.
like that. But it sounds differently, it sounds different. Also, this is polished a little bit, but on this side, it's not polished at all. You can see the roughness of the oryx. So this sounds a little different. It's long, so it has a lower pitch, but that's the oryx. Now, this is used in the Jubilee year, but you let me know if you figure out what's the Jubilee year. But so that's when that's going to be used. And so that's not used. You won't see that being used on Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. Now, here's an ibex. The ibex is a beautiful, beautiful animal. And when I was in Israel at one time, I took this photograph of the ibex. The ibex hangs around the Negev, and it's monster horn.
Yeah.
And those animals are really taken care of by the Israeli government. They just are around in the Negev, and they're not fearsome, but they're taken care of very much, and you'll find tags on these animals because the Israeli government takes care of them. So this one, I'll get to this. So here is an ibex horn. And you can see it's not as big as the one that you saw in that picture over there. And this is probably the most rare one that I have, because the Israeli government doesn't, really monitors. The other animals are fairly common, but this animal is really taken care of and it's only in the Negev area. So this sounds a little differently. It's also shorter, so you would expect it to be maybe a little bit higher pitch. So wasn't that high. But so that's the ibex. So then, question is, do we sound long tones, short tones? What kind of tones do we have? And there's a whole bunch of debates there was in the Talmud about what do you sound. The tekiah, and you know this, of course, Anna, but you know that the tekiah is a long blast. If I were to go ahead and use that like this here, that's the tekiah. But a shabarim is three medium blasts. Something like that. And then the teruah is 9 short blasts. Something like that. So question is, and of course the tekiah gadolor is the longest note. And the question is, hey, which ones do you use? Well, in the Talmud, they couldn't make up their mind. Long, short, middle, this, that. So they said, let's use them all. And that's why when we come down to it, we do indeed use them all. When we use the tekiah, teruah, shabarim, the whole deal. And that was a way of a compromising. So this is typically the way we have it: tekiah, shabarim, teruah, tekiah, and so forth. So that's that's how they arrived at that. Only because it was a compromise for Rosh Hashanah. The person who blows the shofar in the synagogue, in the shul, is called a Baal Tekiah. And now here's something I find fascinating. In the Talmud, they say, hey, even if you're deaf, you have a responsibility to hear the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. And the way a deaf person hears the shofar is to touch it, because then they feel the vibration. And that's how a deaf person can hear the shofar. So isn't that interesting? A person can still a deaf person can still hear the shofar by touching it.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah. So for those of you, or I know you know how to do this. So I don't know if anybody sees this who doesn't know how to blow a shofar. It's easy, but if you're from the Bronx like me, it's really easy, because in the Bronx, I lived in the Bronx when I was a kid, growing up, and we had something called the Bronx Cheer. And the Bronx Cheer was nothing more than, kind of a spitting sound like that. And that's exactly how you go ahead and you moisten your lips, and you put your lips together, and they vibrate, and you blow the air out, and that's how you blow the shofar. It's just that easy. That's the way it's done. So that's a fast presentation.
So I have a question.
Sure.
How long does it take to like fully polish a shofar? Like how long does that process take?
Well, they use tools today. They use machines. You saw that place in Tel Aviv. As far as I know, there are two places in Israel where they actually make shofars. One is in Tel Aviv and the other is on the Golan Heights. I never went to the one on the Golan Heights, but I did go to the one, and my son, David, went there with me, and my grandson went with me to the place in Tel Aviv. And they make them in less than a day. They can polish it up and do a nice job. They cut it, they twist it into place, they heat it and twist it into place. So they can do it in less than a day with no problem. Several of them, in fact, in a day. Yeah. Any other question?
That was all my questions.
Okay.
I didn't know that my shofar was not a ram's horn.
Oh, no?
Yeah, I think I bought it when I was like 8 years old.
Uh-huh.
So I picked it out in Israel in the Arab market.
Sure.
And, yeah, I guess someone told me that shofars were ram's horns, and that just stuck. But funny, because it's obviously not a ram's horn.
No, it's not. And you don't use a ram's horn. And you can see that something like this or this guy, it's much smaller.
Yeah.
Than the one this is a ram's horn, and it sounds different.
Yeah, definitely. Mine is much lower.
Yeah, and because of the the size, this is pretty loud. This guy over here is pretty loud. It's pretty loud. Um, the oryx and the ibex are shofars also, but and the ibex is although the ibex is uh, is curved, it's not a corkscrew,
Mm.
so it's not preferred, but it could be used. But this guy, the oryx, is pretty much straight,
Yeah.
and this is a chauffeur. I actually saw when I was at the wall one time. I saw a guy coming with the chauffeur. Maybe it was the Jubilee year, and I didn't even know it. But this is only to be used during that time. This is not legitimate for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur.
Very cool. I haven't seen one of those before.
Yeah, yeah. Well, chances are the ibex you didn't see either because this
Yeah,
is
probably not.
more unusual. But yeah, this is an interesting chauffeur. Okay.
Yeah, well, it was so nice listening to your presentation. Yeah, I just didn't know all of this information, and yeah, I didn't realize there was so much to learn. So, um,
Well, hope it's useful. And if you have any questions, just give me a shout.
great. Well,
Okay?
thank you,
Okay.
and have a
Have
nice
a
night and Shana Tova.
happy and healthy one.